The space station floated in the darkness between stars like a silver flower made of metal and glass. They called it Seven, and it was supposed to be a place of peace. Students from dozens of alien species came here to learn together, to build friendships that would last across the galaxy. That was the dream, anyway. The reality was something very different. Pressed her face against the cold window of her small room and watched a cargo ship drift toward the docking bay. She had been on this station for 3 months now, and she still felt like a stranger. Back on Earth, she had been one of the top students in her university. Here, she was just another human, and humans were not respected. There were only 3 humans on the entire station. Was studying xenobiology, the science of alien life. Was an engineering student with quiet eyes and clever hands. Was training to be a medic, always carrying a small bag of emergency supplies wherever she went. The 3 of them had found each other in the first week, drawn together by their shared loneliness. The other species looked at humans the way a wolf might look at a rabbit. There were tall, insect-like creatures with sharp mandibles that could cut through metal. They clicked their jaws whenever humans walked past, making sounds that their translators refused to convert. There were massive reptiles who stood on 2 legs and had scales harder than armor. They called humans soft ones, and laughed at their small teeth and weak bodies. The Myra were elegant beings who could read minds and move objects with their thoughts. They considered humans to be primitive animals who had somehow learned to build spaceships. Tried not to let it bother her. She kept her head down in class, took careful notes, and never spoke unless a professor asked her a direct question. She had learned quickly that arguing only made things worse. When a student had pushed her in the hallway during her first week, she had simply picked herself up and walked away. Fighting back would have meant expulsion, or worse. But something was wrong on Seven. Had noticed it slowly, like watching clouds gather before a storm. Security guards who used to patrol the human residential area had been moved to other sections. Supply shipments meant for human students kept getting lost or delayed. An administrator, the who ran the station, watched the 3 humans with eyes that held no warmth at all. Was old for his species. His scales faded to a dull gray, but he moved with the easy confidence of a predator. He made speeches about unity and cooperation, but saw how his claws tightened whenever he mentioned Earth. There were rumors that he had lost family members in a border conflict with human colonies years ago. There were other rumors too, darker ones that students only whispered about in private. Shared her concerns with and during their evening meal in the cafeteria. They sat at a corner table, far from the other students, speaking in low voices. "You are being paranoid," said, but his eyes moved nervously around the room. They would not dare to harm exchange students. Earth would respond. "Earth is very far away," replied. She had dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. And accidents happen on space stations all the time. Airlock failures, chemical leaks, equipment malfunctions. Pushed her food around her plate. The station served meals designed for human nutrition, but everything tasted slightly wrong, like fruit that had been left in the sun too long. "I intercepted a transmission fragment yesterday," she said quietly. "I was running diagnostics on a communication relay for my engineering elective, and I caught a piece of an encrypted message." Leaned forward. "What did it say?" "Phase 2. Eliminate the human contamination. Make it look like an accident." His voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I could not trace the source, but the encryption signature matched administrative channels." His face went pale. "We need to contact Earth. We need to get off this station." "How?" asked. "Long-range communications require administrator approval. The next transport ship is not scheduled for 6 weeks, and if we try to run, we will only confirm whatever story they plan to tell about us." They sat in silence for a long moment. Around them, alien students laughed and talked and lived their normal lives, unaware of the shadow hanging over the 3 humans in the corner. "Then we prepare," said finally. "We learn the layout of the station. We identify escape routes. We gather supplies, and we stay together as much as possible. Nodded slowly. On Earth, her ancestors had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had fought predators with nothing but sharp rocks and stubborn determination. They had climbed to the top of the food chain not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they refused to give up. She looked at her two friends and saw the same ancient fire in their eyes. They were afraid. Only a fool would not be afraid, but they were also ready. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. That night dreamed of wolves circling a campfire, waiting for the flames to die. In her dream, she picked up a burning branch and stepped forward to meet them. She woke with the smell of smoke still in her nose and the strange feeling that something inside her had begun to change. 3 days later, the wolves came for real. The morning started like any other. Sat in her usual seat at the back of the xenobiology classroom, her notebook open, her stylus ready. 30 students filled the curved rows of desks, and in Myra and a dozen other species she had learned to identify by sight. Professor, an elderly with kind eyes and a patient voice, was explaining the feeding patterns of deep space organisms. Sat 2 seats to her left, was in the medical wing for her morning training but had promised to meet them for lunch. Everything felt normal, everything felt safe. Then the door slammed shut with a sound like thunder. His head snapped up. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in deep red. A loud alarm began to wail, but it cut off after only 3 seconds, as if someone had silenced it deliberately. Through the reinforced windows that looked out onto the corridor, she saw shadows moving. Big shadows, wrong shadows. Professor moved toward the door controls, his old scales scraping against the floor. "Everyone stay calm," he said. "This is probably just a drill. I will contact security in." The wall exploded inward. Pieces of metal and plastic flew across the room. A student was thrown from her seat, her exoskeleton cracking against a desk. And through the hole in the wall came something out of a nightmare. It stood 3 meters tall, its body covered in plates of black armor that looked like insect shells fused with bone. 4 arms hung from its shoulders, each one ending in claws that curved like sickles. Its head was eyeless, but dozens of small holes dotted its skull, sensory organs that could track prey by heat and sound and smell. When it opened its mouth, saw 3 rows of teeth designed for one purpose only. A ravager. She had read about them in her xenobiology texts, genetically modified hunting beasts created by a species that had been wiped out centuries ago. Their creation was considered a war crime. Owning one meant death in 12 star systems. And now one was standing in her classroom, turning its blind head slowly from side to side as it searched for targets. Professor stepped between the creature and his students. "Run," he said quietly. "Find another way out. I will hold it here." He did not last 3 seconds. The Ravager moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment was standing. The next, he was in pieces on the floor, and the creature was already reaching for the nearest student. Screaming filled the room. They clicked in terror, their mandibles snapping uselessly at the air. The Myra collapsed where they sat, their hands pressed against their heads. The Ravager was broadcasting some kind of psychic interference that overwhelmed their sensitive minds. Even the students, who had always seemed so powerful and confident, froze like prey animals caught in a spotlight. Administrator's voice crackled over the speaker system. His tone was smooth, almost bored. "Attention all personnel. We are experiencing an unfortunate containment breach. Wild specimens have escaped from the research sector. All students should remain in their classrooms and await rescue. Security teams are being dispatched to priority areas." He paused and heard something in that pause. A smile, a cold, satisfied smile. "Human residential sectors will be addressed first," continued. "Please remain calm." Grabbed arm and pulled her down behind a row of desks. "Did you hear that?" He said. "Human sectors. This is not random. They are hunting us." Through the chaos, saw a second Ravager tear through another section of wall, then a third. The creatures were spreading out, methodical, efficient. They killed anyone who got in their way, but they were clearly searching for something specific. Their eyeless heads kept turning toward the humans in the room. 26 students remained alive. 3 of them were human. The door was sealed. The windows were reinforced against the vacuum of space. There were no weapons, no communications, no help coming. Burst through a maintenance hatch in the floor, her medical bag clutched against her chest. She had cuts on her face and terror in her eyes. "They are everywhere," she gasped. 5 of them, maybe more. They killed everyone in the medical wing. I barely escaped through the ventilation system. Looked around the classroom. Alien students who had mocked and dismissed her for months were now crying, praying to gods she did not know, waiting to die. The Ravagers were closing in, their claws scraping against metal, their hunting clicks echoing through the red-lit room. Something cold and hard settled in his chest. It was not fear. She had moved past fear into something older and deeper. Her ancestors had faced saber-toothed cats with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had hunted mammoths across frozen plains. They had survived everything a brutal planet could throw at them, and they had won. She was not going to die in this room. Stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the nearest Ravager. It turned toward her, sensing her movement, her heat, her heartbeat. Its mouth opened in what might have been anticipation. She reached down and grabbed a metal stool. The stool was made of cheap metal, the kind used for furniture that needed to be light and easy to replace. Gripped 2 of its legs and twisted with all her strength. The welds gave way with a sharp crack, and suddenly she was holding a jagged metal bar about half a meter long. It was not a weapon. It was barely a tool, but it was something. The Ravager facing her made a sound like grinding stones. Perhaps it was laughter. This tiny soft creature, this prey animal with no claws and no armor and no venom, was going to fight back with a piece of broken furniture. How amusing, how pathetic. It lunged forward, all 4 arms extended, claws gleaming in the red emergency lights. Did not run. She did not freeze. She did exactly what a million years of evolution had prepared her to do. She analyzed, adapted, and attacked. The Ravager was fast, but it was also predictable. Its hunting instincts told it that prey ran away. Prey cowered. Prey made itself small and hoped to be overlooked. Nothing in its genetic programming prepared it for a creature that charged directly toward it. Ducked under the first swipe, feeling the wind of the claws pass over her head. She rolled forward, sliding between the monster's legs on the blood-slicked floor. For one terrible second, she was directly beneath it, surrounded by armored limbs and the smell of death. Then she was behind it, and she was already moving. The Ravager's armor was thick everywhere except for one spot, the soft tissue beneath its jaw, where sensory nerves connected to its eyeless head. Had studied these creatures for a xenobiology paper. She knew their anatomy better than they knew themselves. She jumped onto the creature's back, wrapped her legs around its neck, and drove the jagged stool leg upward into that vulnerable spot with every bit of strength she possessed. The metal punched through flesh and kept going. The Ravager screamed, a horrible high-pitched sound that made the walls vibrate. It thrashed wildly, trying to throw her off, but held on. She twisted the metal bar, grinding it deeper, searching for something vital. Hot black blood sprayed across her face, her arms, her chest. The creature's movements became jerky, uncoordinated. Its arms swung without purpose. Its legs buckled. Pulled out the stool leg and stabbed again, and again, and again. The Ravager fell. It twitched once, twice, and then lay still. Black blood spread across the classroom floor in a growing pool. Silent, complete and total silence. Slid off the creature's corpse and stood on shaking legs. She was covered in alien blood. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Every muscle in her body burned with exhaustion and adrenaline, but she was alive. She turned to face her classmates. The aliens stared at her with expressions she had never seen before. The had stopped clicking. The Myra had stopped crying. Even those mighty reptiles who had called her a soft one were pressing themselves against the far wall as if trying to get as far away from her as possible. They were afraid, not of the ravagers of her. A student made a small sound. His translator converted it to words. What? What are you? Wiped blood from her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at the stool leg in her grip, then at the dead monster at her feet, then at the terrified faces of species that had spent months treating her like an inferior animal. I am human, she said simply, and moved to stand beside her, had found a length of pipe somewhere, held a surgical tool from her medical bag, its blade extended. They were both shaking, both scared, but they were also both ready. You called us prey, continued, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. You laughed at our soft skin and our small teeth. You thought we were weak because we do not have natural weapons. She gestured at the dead ravager. On our planet, we hunted things like this for fun. We drove creatures bigger and stronger and faster than us into extinction because they made the mistake of competing with humans. We did not evolve claws because we did not need them. We learned to make tools instead. We learned to work together. We learned to never, ever give up. Another ravager roared somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed through the corridors, getting closer. Looked at the frightened aliens. These were the same students who had pushed her in hallways, who had whispered insults behind her back, who had treated her like something less than a person. Part of her wanted to leave them to their fate. But that was not who she was. That was not who humans were. There are more of those things coming, she said. You can sit here and die or you can help us fight. Those are your only choices. She held up the bloody stool leg. Who wants to live? Something changed in that classroom. Could see it in the way the alien students looked at each other, the way they slowly uncurled from their protective huddles, the way fear began to transform into something else. Not courage exactly, that would come later. For now, it was simply the refusal to die without trying. A young named was the first to move. He stepped forward, his scales still pale with shock, and picked up a piece of broken desk. Tell me what to do, he said. Others followed. Students gathered sharp debris. Myra students forced themselves to focus through the psychic interference. Even the species could not name joined the growing circle around the three humans. Began organizing them immediately. She did not ask permission. She did not apologize for taking command. There was no time for politics, and everyone in that room understood that the humans knew something about survival that they did not. They have sensitive antennae, said, pointing at the students. You can detect vibrations through the floor and walls. You are our early warning system. Spread out to the corners of the room and tell us when something is coming. They obeyed without hesitation. The Myra can project mental illusions, yes, continued. When several Myra students nodded, she said, the Ravagers use psychic sensors to track prey. Can you create false signals? Make them think we are somewhere we are not. A Myra student with silver skin spoke up. We can try. The interference makes it difficult, but if we work together, we might be able to project false heat signatures or emotional imprints. Do it. Make the Ravagers chase ghosts while we prepare. Turn to the students. You are the strongest species here. I need you to block the entrances with whatever you can find. Desks, chairs, pieces of wall, anything heavy. We need to control how they enter. As the aliens worked, pulled and aside, the three humans stood over the dead Ravager, studying it with cold, practical eyes. 4 more out there, said. Maybe 5. I was not able to count them all. Their armor has gaps, observed, pointing at the creature's joints. The elbows, the knees, the connection points between segments, and the back of the head where the spine meets the skull. Nodded. They hunt by sound, heat, and psychic presence. If we can mask our signatures and approach from blind angles, we can take them one by one. "We are not hunters," said quietly. "We are students. Our ancestors were hunters before they were anything else." Looked at her friend with ancient fire in her eyes. "This is what we were made for. We just forgot for a while." They spent 20 minutes preparing. The barricaded 3 of the 4 entrances, leaving only one controlled access point. The Myra practiced projecting false signals, learning to work through the psychic static. They took up positions throughout the room, their antennae twitching at every distant sound. And the 3 humans armed themselves. Kept her bloody stool leg. Fashioned a spear from a broken support beam, sharpening one end against the floor until it could pierce armor. Collected surgical tools designed for cutting through alien tissues. They would work just as well on Ravagers. When the preparations were complete, made her decision. "We are not going to wait for them to find us," she announced. "We are going to hunt them." The aliens stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "The Ravagers expect prey," explained. "They expect fear and running and hiding. They do not expect something to stalk them through the corridors." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Humans are the best endurance hunters in the known galaxy. We can track prey for days without stopping. We can run down creatures 10 times our speed simply by never giving up." She looked at and, "Are you ready?" They nodded. The 3 humans slipped out through the maintenance hatch, leaving instructions for the aliens to hold the classroom and maintain the psychic decoys. They moved through ventilation shafts and service tunnels, following the sounds of destruction, tracking the Ravagers by the chaos they left behind. The first kill was fast and brutal. They caught a Ravager alone in a storage bay, distracted by a psychic ghost the Myra had projected. Dropped from a ceiling vent onto its back while drove his spear into its knee joint. When it fell, opened its throat with a surgical blade. The second kill was harder. The Ravager saw them coming and fought back. It caught with a glancing blow that opened a cut across his arm, but distracted it while circled behind. They brought it down together, 3 small humans against a monster bred for war. By the 4th kill, something strange was happening. The Ravagers were no longer hunting. They were fleeing. Could hear them in the distance, confused clicking sounds, hunting calls that went unanswered, the heavy footsteps of creatures that had never learned to fear anything. They were learning now. Picked up a claw she had severed from the 3rd Ravager. It was longer than her arm and sharper than any blade. She tested its weight, found it balanced. "One more," she said. But one Ravager was not her true target. Somewhere on this station, Administrator was watching monitors and waiting for news of dead humans. He thought he was safe behind his locked doors and security systems. He was wrong. Administrator sat in his command center and watched his plans fall apart. The monitors showed things that should not be possible. 5 Ravagers, perfect killing machines bred from the genetic nightmares of a dead civilization, were being dismantled by 3 human students armed with broken furniture and stolen claws. The creatures that had slaughtered entire military units were running away from a 22-year-old girl covered in their own blood. Had waited years for this moment. He had spent fortunes acquiring the Ravagers from black market dealers. He had bribed inspectors and reports and slowly removed every safeguard that might protect the human students. He had imagined watching them die slowly, screaming, begging for mercy that would never come. Instead, he was watching his expensive weapons being hunted through his own station, by the prey they were supposed to kill. His claws tightened on the arms of his chair. The scales on his neck flushed dark with anger. This was not how it was supposed to end. Humans were weak. Humans were soft. Everyone in the galaxy knew this. It was scientific fact. The last Ravager died on Monitor 7. Watched the human called drive a severed claw through its skull with mechanical precision. She was not even breathing hard anymore. She moved like something out of ancient horror stories, silent, patient, unstoppable. Made his decision. If the Ravagers could not kill the humans, then nothing would survive. He reached for the emergency console and activated the station's final, a purge system designed to deal with contamination by venting entire sections into the vacuum of space. In 30 seconds, the educational wing would be open to the stars, and everyone inside would die. It was messy. It was wasteful. It would require extensive explanations to the Galactic Council, but at least the humans would be dead. He entered his authorization code and pressed the button. Nothing happened. Pressed it again and again. Error messages flashed across his screen: system disabled, authorization rejected, manual override in progress. I disconnected that system about 10 minutes ago. Spun in his chair. The voice had come from the shadows near the ventilation shaft, a section of wall he had never considered a security risk because it was too small for any species to crawl through. Any species except humans. Stepped into the light. She was covered in black blood from her hair to her boots. Her clothes were torn. Her skin was marked with cuts and bruises that would become scars. She held a Ravager claw in one hand, its curved edge still dripping. Her eyes reflected the glow of the monitors, and there was something in those eyes that made ancient survival instincts scream warnings. This was not prey. This had never been prey. "You killed Professor," said. Her voice was quiet, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "He was the only professor who treated humans with respect. He died trying to protect his students from your monsters." Reached for the weapon at his belt. Reflexes were legendary, faster than almost any species in the known galaxy. His claws closed around the grip of his plasma pistol. He never finished drawing it. Moved like water, like shadow, like something that existed between heartbeats. One moment she was across the room. The next, she was inside his guard, and the Ravager claw was pressed against the soft tissue under his jaw, the same vulnerable spot she had used to kill the first creature. "You made a mistake," she said softly. "You looked at humans and saw soft skin, small teeth, no natural weapons. You saw a species that could not possibly be dangerous." She pressed the claw slightly deeper. A thin line of blood ran down his neck. "You forgot to ask the important question," continued. "You forgot to wonder how a species like that became the dominant life form on their entire planet. You forgot to ask why every predator on Earth learned to fear humans instead of hunting them." Tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Terror had replaced anger. He was not used to being on this end of fear. "We are not prey," said. "We never were. We are the most successful predators in our planet's history. We drove hundreds of species to extinction. We changed the climate of our world. We tamed fire and split atoms and walked on our own moon. And we did all of that while looking exactly like this, soft, small, harmless." She smiled and finally understood why humans had conquered Earth. "That is what makes us dangerous. You never see us coming until it is too late." Galactic security arrived 3 hours later, responding to emergency signals that had managed to send once the communication systems were unlocked. They found 23 surviving students barricaded in a classroom, protected by 3 exhausted humans. They found 5 Ravager corpses arranged in a neat row. They found Administrator alive but broken, with a full confession recorded on his own security systems. The incident report spread across the galaxy within days. News networks played footage of the small human girl standing over dead monsters. Scientists revised their classifications of Earth from developing world to death world. Military strategists studied the recordings and quietly updated their threat assessments. Returned to her studies the following semester. She still sat in the back of the classroom, still kept her head down, still focused on her xenobiology texts. Some things did not need to change. But other things had changed forever. When she walked the corridors of Galactic Unity Academy, every species stepped aside. Not out of fear exactly, though there was some of that. Out of respect, out of recognition, out of understanding that humans were something new in the galaxy, something that could not be measured by claws or armor or psychic powers. One evening, a young student approached her table in the cafeteria. He was trembling slightly, but he forced himself to speak. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for how we treated you before. We did not understand." Looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, warm and human. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Tell me about your home world." The galaxy had learned something important about humanity that day. Humans were not prey, humans were not weak, but most importantly, humans were not cruel. They did not hold grudges. They did not seek revenge for its own sake. They simply refused to be underestimated ever again.